So I am here with Elan Mastai, who has been a screenwriter for nearly 2 decades, and he was actually named as one of Variety's 10 screenwriters to watch. He's currently a writer and producer on the Emmy award-winning TV series This Is Us, although I guess everything is on pause right now as the industry has kind of shut down due to the COVID-19. He has written movies for major studios, including Fox, Sony, Warner Brothers, Lionsgate, and Paramount. And he's also the scribe behind the Canadian romantic comedy, The F Word, which is known in the US under the title What If? And it is directed by Michael Dowse and stars Daniel Radcliffe, Zoe Kazan, and Adam Driver. And the film earned a lot of fans for the film itself and also for Elan. And apparently we have a lot of really huge fans over at First Weekend Club, and the film tops a lot of favorite lists. He's also the author of a science fiction novel, All Our Wrongs Today, which earned him a 7-figure deal, which is kind of unusual for a debut. And today we're going to talk all about his writing experiences and approaches towards the craft of writing. Hi, Elan. Welcome to our chat. How are you?
I'm okay. Thanks for having me. I find, now that we're all adjusting to living our social and professional lives through video conferencing, I don't know where I'm supposed to look. You know, like, do you look at the lens? Do you look at the person you're talking to? Do you look at yourself? It's very strange.
I'm just as confused as you are, but I think on days when I look good, then I might just look at myself.
All right.
No narcissism at all. And other days when I've just scruffed up, then I might look at the other person for a change.
It provides an interesting opportunity for it's so rare in our lifetime for like new kind of like social niceties and sort of like traditions, rituals to develop. But like all of a sudden we've all had to figure out like what's the protocol with video conferencing. And so it's super interesting. I mean, like, it's a crazy time to be alive, but as a writer, it's like you try to find the little funny foibles that are like that you can kind of like hook onto.
Yeah, that's very true. I actually managed to crash somebody's house party by accident, not realizing. And it was just as awkward as it would have been in real life. So I must say.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I wrote The F Word, and then when we, also known as What If, and then when we shot The F Word, even in that little period, something changed socially, which was that like nobody just stood around waiting anymore. You always had your phone, so you would never just like wait for somebody. If you were waiting for somebody, you'd be like this.
Right.
You know, do this. So we put that in the movie, and it's like it was really funny because it was like a thing we realized on set. Like, nobody just stands there and waits for anybody anymore. You look at your phone the whole time. So we worked that into the movie, and it made it feel much more contemporary than it would have had we left that out.
Yeah. Well, now that we're living with COVID-19, one of the things that I was thinking about a lot, so I'm really inspired by David Sedaris and sort of how he writes from this, his interactions with people. And now that we're all cooped up, that is something that is very hard to do because your experiences are suddenly just with yourself. So has that, as a writer, how has that been for you?
I mean, look, I don't want to be glib about what everybody's dealing with in the world. It's obviously pretty terrible and scary and stress-inducing and anxiety-fueling. But as a writer, like life isn't that different. I mean, on a practical level, I'm working on the same stuff. I spend a huge amount of time by myself inside, just working and kind of losing myself in my fictional world. So, I mean, on a very pragmatic level, it's not that different than just like regular life as a writer. But obviously on a social level, it's very different. And I think as writers, I don't know, like I think there's going to be this line drawn across, the 21st century. And anything that happened before this is going to feel like a period piece, just like if you were writing like an espionage thriller before September 11th, 2001, like everything has to change in the way you're telling your story. So we're in the middle of it right now. And I don't think anybody knows the answer, but it does feel like there's going to be before and after, and we're all going to figure out how to incorporate that into our storytelling.
Do you find that you're a writer who relies more on your imagination as opposed to observation?
Both. I mean, no, I'd say most of my writing starts with observation, either from my own life or the lives of the people I'm closest to. But I tend to be like, I tend to, like a lot of people, like if I'm in some sort of interesting situation or conflict or whatever, I tend to try to do the most reasonable, conflict averse, minimize the drama decision in my life. But in my writing, I'm often thinking, well, what if I didn't do that? What if I couldn't do that? What if I couldn't do the most reasonable thing? What if I had to do the unreasonable thing? What if I had to do the more dramatic thing? What if I had to make that choice? What would be the circumstances that would have put me in that place? And those are often the stories I'm interested in telling, ones that are sort of inspired by stuff going on in my own life or the people I'm closest to, but I take the characters in a different direction and they do things that I wouldn't necessarily do, but are sort of dramatically interesting to me.
Yeah. I keep thinking that, because as writers, we're all sort of cooped up in our homes. We have no excuse but not to write. So I imagine there'll be a lot of screenplays also coming out from this.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, yes, we all want that time to just be able to focus on our work. And this, of course, isn't the way anybody wanted that time. I have actually been finding it incredibly productive. But I think partially that's my personality. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with not being productive right now, and just kind of doing as much like self-care as possible. But I do find like I'm pretty good at shutting out, but like it's the way that I actually cope is by shutting out like what's actually going on in the world and just focusing on the fictional world that I'm in. And whether it's writing an episode of This Is Us or working on a new novel or a script project of my own, actually it's been the real kind of saving grace of this period is just being able to like lose myself in fiction.
That is definitely something that a lot of people, including myself, are struggling with, is that idea of how do you find creativity? How do you escape into these worlds when this world is so punching you all over your, in your face over and over again, kind of.
Yeah, but that's probably like if I was being like set upon by goons and they were beating me, I would probably like curl up in a ball and just start imagining something fictional was happening to me. So that's probably just how my brain works. I'd be like curled up and they'd be hitting me and I'd just be thinking about like a scene or something.
Right. And what do you do usually when you're stuck, when there's a piece of writing that you're just not quite getting that scene or that idea or that character? What's sort of your process with that?
I often go for a walk, which I can't do right now. Usually I'll just mix it up. I'll do something else, whether it is going for a walk or a run or something like that, or listening to some music or just do, like cooking, cleaning, anything. Sometimes it's getting on the phone with a friend. Sometimes it's just working on something else. I find just, you start to get that sludgy feeling like you're moving through mud a little bit and it's not coming. And I just, rather than kind of keep wading deeper and deeper into the quicksand, I just turn around and go back to solid ground and work on something else or just change it up completely. And then I find that usually loosens it up. Usually, I mean, look, I've been doing this for a while, as you mentioned in the intro. It's been like almost 20 years. And I know the feeling when something's not working, when it's not coming together dramatically, it's usually because there's something structurally wrong with the construction of the scene. If I can't write it smoothly, if like I'm getting into the weeds, it's getting kind of muddy. I know there's always something built wrong with the way I imagined it. Which, even though I've been doing it for 20 years, happens all the time. Like you have an idea for what the scene should be dramatically, but it doesn't work structurally. And so what I often do is I just kind of, what's another way I could tell this story? Like this piece of information, do I even need this scene, first of all? Like sometimes you think you need the scene, but you don't. Do I even need it? What is the actual information in the scene that is crucial to the story I'm telling? Is this the most interesting way it could come about? Like the question I ask myself constantly, like every single scene, pretty much every single moment, is what does the audience expect right now? And do I want to lean into that expectation? Or do I want to subvert that expectation, right? Like what is the relationship I want this particular moment, the work as a whole, but this particular moment with the audience's expectations based on their entire lifetime of consuming narrative? what do I think they're expecting? Do I want that to happen? Do I want something else to happen? How am I going to subvert it? Am I going to subvert it significantly? Am I going to just kind of do a little tiny tweak on it? So I'm thinking about that all the time. And so sometimes what I find isn't working in a scene is that it's exactly what you expect, right? And I feel like if what is going to happen in the scene is exactly what the audience expects to happen in the scene, then I do not need that scene, right? I need a scene where what they're not expecting happens. Otherwise, why are they even watching it? So usually I feel like by stepping away from it, I often like, sometimes it's like, what is this piece of information buried in the scene? Like I have a revelation, I have something somebody has to reveal. It's like, what if it's the first thing they said instead of the last thing they said? What if they just say it right away? Or what if the person doesn't want to hear it? What if they're busy? Like, those are just two very obvious things, but I'm often like, just break it apart and see if the pieces fit together in a different order. And that sometimes loosens you up a lot.
Right.
Was that too granular an answer?
Absolutely. And, I'm curious to know, because every writer's different. What is your process like when are you somebody who procrastinates? Are you somebody who's really focused? Do you write fast? Do you do a lot of notes before you start writing? How do you approach it?
I mean, it kind of depends on the project, but generally speaking, I like to really work it out in my mind before I sit down, like to avoid the exact problem we were just talking about, really worked everything out. I like to hold the whole project in my head before I start writing, if I have the luxury of time to do that, because I feel like if I can't hold it in my head, I can't expect the audience to. And then once I feel like it's all worked out, I'm able to sit down and usually write quite fast. I'm not really a procrastinator. I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, so I certainly procrastinated much more when I was starting out. But I tend to kind of keep myself to a pretty strict schedule. Like I treat it like a day job, So I'm usually at my desk writing from a certain, and I try to keep like a schedule every day and do a good amount of work every day. Even if it's bad. I mean, the big thing that for me is like, I don't mind if it's bad. I think that can really hold people back when they're starting. Like they want it to be good. They want it to be as good as the things that inspired them to write in the first place. But I do not mind writing bad because I know that I will be rewriting it. And it's always easier to rewrite something that exists than it is to start fresh. Staring at a scene, staring at a sentence and saying like, what's a better version of this sentence is different than staring at a blank screen and saying I have to come up with a sentence now. And so I write really quickly and then I revise a lot. So I would never show anybody my first draft. It's often a mess, but it's something that I can then work with. It's like a primer coat. Like that's not the finished coat. And sometimes it might take like 1 or 2 coats. Sometimes it may take 5 or 6. But just giving yourself permission to just like do it really badly, but just get something down. That's the big thing for me.
I think that's something that's very true in terms of like people often talk about the writer's block. And I think that writer's block more often than not, if you really nail down on the reason, it is because it's that fear of failure, that fear that it's not going to be so brilliant, that it's going to be bad. Yeah. And that stops people from filling that page in the first place, right?
Yeah. Let it be bad. It's okay if it's bad. That's what revising is for.
Yeah.
There's never a situation in your professional life as a writer where you're going to give anybody the first draft. It's like there's going to be multiple drafts. What you might present to somebody as the first draft could be like your 5th draft. It's fine. That's just the process.
You just put first draft on that 5th draft.
Oh yeah. Put first draft on it.
Yeah.
To intimidate the other writers, but it's actually the 5th draft. Yeah.
You're like, I'm on my 20th draft, but I'm going to be like, oh, sorry, it's my first draft. It's a barf draft. Just don't worry about it. We'll fix it.
Yeah.
You probably have a lot of ideas for projects, for films, for types of writing that you do. How do you know that this is the one that's ultimately going to be worth your time and your focus?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's a good question. Because I usually take a fair amount of time to think things through before I decide I'm going to write it. It's the things that stay with me. I do have a lot of ideas and I try to write down as many of them as possible. But it's the ideas that stay with me that I kind of can't let go of, that just keep bugging me. And I find myself thinking about them and thinking about them and thinking about them all the time. If I find myself like able to think of something, think it's cool, and then I don't think about it anymore, then I know that that's not going to be worth dedicating like months, probably years of my life to it, right? Whereas if I find myself like haunted, you know, like it's following me like a ghoul, then I know that that's an idea that I'm going to want to stick with through all the ups and downs. They're inevitable for any project.
That's a great guideline, actually, because I think that is something that a lot of people struggle with.
Well, it's normal to get excited about a new idea, especially if you're in the weeds on another idea that you like have been working on and it's like hard. And this is like your new fresh idea and it's like exciting, but it's like, you're going to get to that weedy, muddy kind of kludgy, you're going to get there. You're just not there now because it's the beginning. So yeah, I try not to trust that kind of like bloom of first love. I try to like commit to my ideas. And you know, it's like deciding who you're going to marry. Like ideally, it's not, you're not constantly like, oh, that's an interesting person. That's an interesting person. It's like, no, like the person that stays with you, that haunts you, that's the person to commit to. That's that project to commit to.
I sort of hesitate just calling you a screenwriter because, you know, you've written a novel, you're producing. So I guess you're more of a storyteller. But when did you know that storytelling and putting words down on paper was what you're sort of meant to do?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, I mean, I would say there's two answers. One is that I had been interested in it from a young age. Like I loved storytelling, I loved reading, I loved movies, I loved like hearing stories. But growing up, I didn't really know how you make like a living out of it. Like I didn't know how that becomes a profession. And so for a long time, I would have said that it's just like, it's something that I love doing, but I'm not going to earn a living doing that. It's just going to be like a thing I do for myself. But for me, I mean, this is maybe overly personal, but like my mom died, and she had cancer, and I was pretty young when it happened, and I mean, if going through that terrible period for my family and for me taught me anything, was that like we don't have unlimited time here, and that if this is something that I want to do, I should at least try. Like what it made me realize was like, the world is going to throw up more than enough obstacles to whatever it is that you want to do creatively, professionally. So you don't need to be one of those obstacles. Like let the world provide you with all the speed bumps, because it will, but don't be your own obstacle. Don't decide, oh, like I think I had thought to myself, well, I don't know how you become a professional writer. That's like, seems impossible. But then it occurred to me, well, I could try. That would be the first step. Like, don't tell yourself you're going to fail until you've tried. Let the world tell you that you're going to fail. And so that was a big thing for me, was going through, I guess, on a personal level, that bad period in my family's life made me realize just how important it was to just try. And so yeah, and then I was really fortunate, I mean, like I had a couple lucky breaks early on that got my career going. But the main thing for me was like, I was always really good at just sitting down and writing, and kind of like getting the bad material out of my system. Again, it goes back to what I was saying before, like give yourself permission to suck, give yourself permission to write badly, because the good writing comes once you've had a chance to like refine that work. And so, I think because I had already told myself like it was never going to happen, I didn't mind failing. I had a pretty good capacity to like fall on my face for a while, and then over time you start tripping less, and eventually you're like, wait, I'm doing it.
Right.
That's how I imagine gymnastics works. I don't know. I've never done gymnastics.
I feel like the world is full of people who are like, one day I'm going to do this thing that I've been dreaming of, and then they don't do it. And I mean, you had obviously a very, not a positive thing that happened in your life, but it did give you, like, you were able to turn that into something.
It gave me a sense of perspective, honestly. I mean, that was what, like not succeeding as a screenwriter seemed very minor in the grand scheme of things. And it's not like I would recommend anybody go through that, but the perspective was really good for me.
Yeah. Another writer told me once, he said, you're going to do a lot of bad writing. You better get started.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cliche, like that kind of Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours. I think I actually once sat down and tried to figure out how many hours I'd spent writing stuff that I didn't think was any good. And it was about 10,000. I was like, oh, it's about 10,000 hours when I actually like did the math. But no, I mean, I think that that's really important. I mean, you know, look, if you are interested in doing anything creative, inevitably you probably have a really good taste. And that's the problem. It's like you go to film school and like you only watch masterpieces. You know, you watch only like the best movies ever made. And of course, like the only bad movies you ever see, like in film school, for example, are like the ones you and your friends are making, right? But the people who you revere, who inspire you, whether it's in film or whatever it is that inspires, like all those people made bad stuff too when they were starting it. You just didn't see any of it. And so I do think it's like you get better through experience, and it's like a muscle like any other. The more you work it, the more in control of it you are. And it is hard when you're starting because the gap between what you feel like it should be and what you're actually producing feels so vast. But you do cross it over time.
Is this something where when it's not so good, is it something where you feel, this doesn't quite feel right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you get a sense of that. Like you know something's not working because you know what works, because you watched a million movies and a million TV shows and read a million books or a million graphic novels or whatever your narrative art of choice. Some people like opera. And so you know that this is not as good as that, although you have personal affection for it because you made it. And so I think that's part of the process too, is recognizing like, not just like that, like being kind of like clinical about that feeling of it's not quite right. Like you're like, the thing about being a writer is you're both the patient and the doctor. You know, you're like, doctor, I have a pain in my side, and then you're also the doctor being, well, let's figure out why. You know, have you been lifting heavy things lately? Did somebody stab you? Like, well, let's figure out why. And so I think that's also part of the process of improving as a writer, is just learning how to become more objective about your strengths and weaknesses, and that feeling of like I do a lot of I love to do table reads, not for novels, but for scripts. And one of the reasons I love it is because, you know, you get a group of actors together. I mean, you know, most of them are pretty attractive. So you get a bunch of attractive people together, and then they read out your script, and you feel so mortified when something's bad, right? Like that feeling, that cringy feeling you get when like something's not working, when like a joke lands badly, or an emotional moment feels melodramatic, or a dramatic moment just kind of like lies flat. Like when people are actually doing it around a table live, like you feel so like cringy, and you learn to trust that cringy feeling. And I think when you go like, okay, this is good. I feel bad right now, but the feeling is good, because when I'm cringing, it's not working, and I can be like it's like a surgeon doing an operation on themselves. It's like, that's where the pain is. I have to fix that.
Yeah. And of course, the moments that do work, you're like,
Yeah.
those are really beautiful, meaningful
Yes,
moments too.
of course. And the moments that do work are what inspire you to keep going.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's, I imagine, looking at your list of credits, I imagine there's probably a lot more that you've written that was maybe sold to studios, was very promising, never saw the light of day. How hard is that?
I mean, like everything, it gets easier over time. Yeah, I've had some. You mentioned a bunch of studios I work for. I've been really lucky. I've been able to make a good living for a long time writing movies, but like a lot of them never happen, and some of them are like, I mean, like with some pretty big people involved, like movie stars, big directors, big producers, and you're like, well, this has to happen, but it doesn't. And there's every single one is just, I could spend 3 hours telling you the story of every single one, and I know all the stories in detail, but you do just kind of get used to the fact that like not every project happens, and it doesn't, and the amount of effort you put in, the amount of time you put in, even the amount of money you were paid has nothing to do with whether it actually gets made. Like the movie gods operate along some kind of funky logic that us mere mortals will never truly understand. That's why I think over time you get better and better at being like, I'm going to get something out of the writing process of this. Like I'm going to make the writing worth it, because if the writing's worth it, even if the film never gets made, it was worth it, or I get to work with a person who I really admire, or who I feel like I can learn something from. And so even if the project doesn't happen, I can learn stuff that's going to make me a better writer. And so that's why, like, over time, it does become really important. Like, I think when you're starting out, it's totally normal. Just like if somebody wants to pay you to write something, like you take the job, right? And over time, and that's fine, but and like just getting paid to write is great. But over time, I think the subject matter, the themes that you're exploring, the personal connection you have to the material becomes more and more important, because that's what gets you through it, even if it doesn't ever happen.
They still are life experiences, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's like making a movie. Like, you go and see, you know, I'll say the F word is one of the more known, you know, well-known things that I've done. Like, you're going to watch that movie and hopefully you love it. Maybe you won't, I don't know, but you're going to have like a 2-hour experience. It's like, my experience of that movie is not the movie. My experience was like writing the movie, getting the movie made, making the movie with this like incredible director, this incredible cast. And so it's like, I had like, that experience for me was like years of my life. It was 2 hours of yours. Like, it's a different experience. I had an amazing time making that movie. I hope people love it, but they're separate experiences.
Well, speaking of the F word, or what if, as a writer, what was it about the romantic comedy aspect that spoke to you, and how did you want to do it maybe differently than what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was I had been doing a lot of work for hire stuff for several years. As I said, like, I was just happy anybody wanted to pay me to write. Some of those experiences have been positive, some of them have been negative. I was at a point in my career, I just wanted to write something that was like in my voice, you know, because I'd been hired to write things. I was often like, oh, you want this? Okay, I will write what you're asking me for. But I wanted to write something that was very much me, whether or not it actually got made or not. That had my sense of humor, that had my kind of like outlook on the world, that had kind of my balance of emotion and humor. And also, I was just like going through stuff in my personal life, and it seemed like a really like interesting way to like explore those questions that I was asking about love and relationships and friendship in my own life. And so, like I was saying, like, it became like, I wanted, the experience of writing it was totally worth it. I wanted to write something in my own voice. I think when I was starting out in my career, I felt like, oh, I should write in like more of a neutral voice, because then the people who I want to make the work, but they'll put their voice into it, the director, the cast, that kind of thing. And I realized after writing that project, I had been totally wrong. That actually, like, what I really needed to do was write in my voice, to find my specific voice as a writer, because what other artists, other directors, other actors, whatever, like what they're looking for is something with a strong point of view that they can add their point of view to. And so that, in fact, actually, I was holding myself back as a writer by kind of trying to write in this like neutral, sort of just not bland, but just like not distinctive voice. The F word was the first thing I wrote that had a very, very clear, it sounded exactly like me. And in fact, people would say when they read it, it's like, oh, it's like basically like, it's like just hanging out with you. And that became like, before even the movie got made, it became a calling card that broke me in Hollywood and got me an agent and a manager and a lawyer down there. And I started booking studio assignments off of that script because it was so specific. And I realized, like, oh, when you write something in your own voice, that actually creates the market for your voice. Because if you write like anybody else could do it, then why do they need you? Whereas if you write something that only you could do, that in a voice that's only yours, well, then that means that they need you.
Someone told me that if you saw a film that you didn't like, what you should say to the person is like, only you can do that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? It's like when you write something that's really you, it does become more personal. People, like, if you write something that's like, it's not really you, and it's just like a job, like, you don't care if people, I mean, it's obviously you prefer people to like it, but whatever. But when you write something that's like really you, and somebody doesn't like it, you're like, oh, like, you don't like the movie, and you honestly probably wouldn't like me either. Like, I always feel like if you watch The F Word and you find it insufferable, like, you actually would probably hate to have dinner with me.
Probably. I guess you just have to live with that.
Yeah, can't
Well,
like everyone.
so you jumped from, so as you said, it was kind of, the F word was almost like a calling card for you. And you jumped from film into TV with This Is Us. What was that transition like? And can you take us into a day in a writer's room for you?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, they're the same and different. Like, obviously, like, as a screenwriter, instead of telling a story with the beginning, middle, and end, you're telling a piece of the story. I mean, some shows are more serialized than others. This Is Us is a very serialized show. So, you know, it's fun. First of all, it's fast compared to making movies. You know, once the machine of a television show is up and running, like, we're constantly coming up with stories, breaking stories, writing stories, shooting stories, editing stories, which is really, really fun, especially when you've spent a lot of time in the movie business where things do move really slowly. You know, on a movie, like I might write a joke and I don't know if it's funny for 5 years, you know, whereas in television, like it's maybe 3 months max. But at Daniel Writer's Room, I mean, we all work in a big kind of conference room around a big table. And there we have our whiteboards where we can like write stuff and erase it. We also have cards up all over the, you know, in different colors because it's an ensemble. Each character has their own color. And so it's very colorful looking. There's all these different like, you know, cards all up everywhere, exploring like the different stories. There's the sort of the broader strokes ideas that we have kind of moving forward. There's like the nitty gritty of each episode that we're breaking. We also have like a big timeline, master timeline of the show, because our show peculiarly like plays with time in really interesting ways. And so we're constantly having to remind ourselves like what happened in the past, where are we, what's happened, because we have the past, we have the present, we have the future. So we have all that kind of information like on the walls around us. And then there's just like a lot of talking about things we're going through, stories from our lives, experiences we're having in the present, things that happened in the past. And most of the stories in the show do spark from something that's happened to somebody. Like, I mean, I can look at any episode this season, I could probably tell you a personal thing that had happened to me, which fed into not every single storyline, but into lots of storylines. The version you see in the show isn't what happened to me. I mean, sometimes it's hilariously autobiographical. Other times it just becomes like a starting point, and then everybody starts adding to it and building it. And so it's very collaborative in that way. Everybody's pitching in with ideas, and then also there's the voice of the show, which is very much the voice of our showrunner, Dan Fogelman. But that sort of the show itself, in terms of where we are with the stories, also kind of pulls, like it has its own gravity that pulls all your sort of personal anecdotes and all the autobiography towards it. So that part of it's fun because it's very communal and it's very social. But then when we go off and write the episodes, like an individual writer will go off and write the episode by themselves. So even though we've talked it all through together and we've broken the story together, when it's like, what's my episode to write? Then I just go off and write it. And then the room continues without me. They're moving forward. And I'm honing in for a few weeks to write the episode, working with the showrunners, and then as a producer on the show as well. When I go to camera, I'm in all the meetings, all the pre-production meetings, working with the director to kind of make sure we're all on the same page. And then I'm on set supervising the episode. And then once that process is done, then I cycle back into the room. And you're keeping a track of where things are so you don't lose it. But it is kind of funny because there is like an industrial side of it, even though we're talking about human emotion and we're talking about like, we're trying to be as relatable as possible to our audience. You are kind of like on this weird like conveyor belt of story, which I really enjoy because it's so different than writing a novel, which might take me like a year and a half by myself in a room. Versus being in television where you're working with like dozens, even hundreds of people to bring this thing to screens.
Although I wonder, when you go off and write your episode, when you come back 4 weeks later, do they move around your chair and mess with stuff on your desk?
No, actually, everybody kind of has their chair. Sometimes people move around a little bit, but it is kind of funny because it's like when you're in the room and somebody else is going to, so it's like there's just like an empty chair there representing them, and then like another person will leave, and then like that person will come back, and so it is this weird thing.
Post-its with like a sticker with that person's face on it.
That'd be nice, yeah, like a little cardboard cutout or something.
Yeah,
but
do you have a glass clown in the writer's room?
Yeah, it's probably me.
You get in trouble?
You know, yeah, I mean, I'm a grown up. I know what
detention after writing.
That's right. Yeah. But so
sorry.
No, please.
Let's talk about your book writing. So you wrote a time traveling story novel, All Our Wrongs Today. You managed to get an amazing, deal for your first novel. So how did that happen, and what was the process of writing the book was like for you? Like, was that like you mentioned that it was sort of done in so much more isolation, so that must have been kind of tough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about like, just to connect to what we were saying before, like I hit a point, I had a couple big like studio projects, a television show that I'd sold, a couple of big movies. It all fell apart one after the other. And I went from having like a year where I was like, oh my God, this is going to be like the busiest year of my life, to like, oh, none of these things are happening now. And I just like, I went through a period, and I think I hit a wall where I was just like, it kind of sucked, you know, like it does. I'm not like, I can be very like nonchalant about it, but like when you work so hard and you spend so much time on a project and it falls apart. And then I had like, it happened like on 3 projects. I just was like, I felt like I needed a break from screenwriting. Like it was just getting a bit depressing, like to not have projects move forward, especially ones that seemed like they were totally happening. And I had this story that had been sitting with me for a really long time. I've been trying to figure out how to tell it as a movie. That's what I imagined it was going to be. And then I remember I was walking my dog, and because I like to walk when I'm trying to think through things. And I said, you know, I wish I could tell this story in the first person. And you can't really tell a movie in the first person. I mean, obviously you can use voiceover, but like a movie is told in the third person, right? Because it's the camera. And I wish I could tell this in the first person, because a lot of the narrative problems that I'm grappling with are problems of like first person versus third person. They're problems of subjectivity. And I thought, you know, if only I was a novelist, then I could just write it in the first person. And that idea of like, oh, what if it's a novel, really started to it kind of started to haunt me, you know, like actually, what if the best way to tell this story is as a book? And I'd never written a novel before. And so that was a bit intimidating. But like a lot of things in my work life, what I try to do is I just go, well, why don't I just try? So I actually sat down on a bench right then and there. I pulled out my phone and I just started like, how would I start it if it was a novel? I know how I would start it if it was a movie. And I just started tapping out on my phone, like the first couple lines. And actually, if you read the book, the first chapter is almost identical to what I tapped out. I mean, I've revised a little, but it's basically exactly what I typed out on my phone, sitting on a bench while my dog whined for me to continue the walk. And I just liked it. And I thought, let me try this again. And so I just started, it's just an experiment. And I didn't know if it was going to be a novel. Maybe it was a short story. I didn't know. I'd never written one before, but I just started to really love what I was writing. And I got really excited about it. And it reinvigorated me with kind of passion and enthusiasm about writing. And just because I think I'd hit a little bit of a wall where the business side of it, like trying to get the movie made part of it, had started to take away from just the pleasure of writing, you know? And so at first it just became that. And then I just got really excited about it, and I liked what I was writing, and I felt like it was pretty good. And that feeling you have, you know when it's not working, but you also start to know when it's working. And I was like, this is working. This is what it's supposed to be. And so I just got rid of the idea of turning it into a movie, and I just wrote it as a book. And it was definitely a risk. Again, it's a personality thing. Like I would rather write something and then see if anybody's interested in it than go out and try to sell a pitch. Like I have sold pitches before, but I find I've always done better in my career when I've just taken the time. And it's a risk because you have to put the time into it. And if nobody wants it, then you wasted the time. But I just found myself really haunted by the story, and I just felt like compelled to write it. And then, you know, I was really lucky. Like there's a lot of enthusiasm from the publishing world for it. We had a bunch of different offers and had a good sale, and we were able to get the book out in a really big way. And it was, you know, I mean, it was definitely a risk to write it, but on the other hand, like I just like loved doing it. And I just kept on to that feeling of, I'm loving writing this so much, like I have to hope that somebody out there is going to love reading it as much as I would. And so yeah, you know, I really followed like it was just a nice example of following your passion, even though there was no one was asking for a book from me. But I just really loved doing it. And I was lucky that people had such a great reaction to it.
Well, you were mentioning how, you know, earlier on in your career, you were trying to sort of write for the market, write for other people. And then you sort of found that writing more in your voice actually was better. And the industry also responded better to that. What would you say is the biggest thing that changed about your voice in general as a writer?
I think I just had more confidence in it. You know, I mean, that was it through positive reinforcement. Like, I mean, the novel likewise is very much like in a very specific, I mean, everybody who read it, that was what they said, is that it has a very specific, like they just love the voice, which is very, very nice because it's very much my personality. And when people don't like the novel, again, it's like I'm sure would hate hanging out with me. So yeah, I think I just got more confident in it. And I mean, like there's the technical side of things as a writer where you just like, over time, the more you do it, you get better at making the words the way they sound in your mind get down on the page the way, and like now I feel like I'm at a point where when I write, it's on the page is the way it sounds in my head. But that was a process. That was a many year process to get there. So I think it's confidence, you know, and you get that from positive reinforcement, from the market or from the public, from the audiences. But then there's also just you, like we talked about many times already in this conversation, like that feeling you have when it's not working or when it is working. Like you just get better at trusting your gut.
Right. Well, I guess my last question to you, at the end of the day, what do you think is the role of a writer in society?
To connect, to help all of us connect. I mean, here we are, you know, we're in this unprecedented time in our history, and we're all so atomized, you know, we're all locked in. And what are we reaching for? You're reaching for stories, you know. I think storytelling is a way to connect with people. I think it's a way to help make sense of the world. Sometimes we imagine futures so that we can make sure they don't happen, you know. Sometimes we imagine futures so that we can make sense of very confusing, challenging, frightening things that are going on in the world. And sometimes it's just an opportunity to kind of like empathize, sympathize, and feel like we're not alone. So I think that's what writing ultimately is, a chance. I think every single piece of writing, whether it's a book, whether it's a movie, television show, play, whatever, is just basically like one person throwing open their window and screaming out, "You are not alone."
That's a great note to end on, and I love that. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks. It was fun to chat with you.